So Robert, I suppose you're an introvert. But because he has the title of lead something, he always has to go first.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. But yes, I am an introvert, and after many years, I'm finally getting used to this. But yeah. So should we go through these? Should we ask first? What do you think?
Ask the room.
Nobody? Ask the room? What do people want to know? We do have the list of questions that were submitted earlier. Some of them horribly offensive. I can't believe you guys came up with these. I mean, asking about cats? Who would want to talk about cats? Yes, go ahead. And I think, Rob, you were raising a hand, I think?
I had a conversation earlier today about your role in helping to support the technology around the publishing for DITA, right? And looking at what other technology might you look at beyond publishing to support DITA beyond what the TC can actually do. What I was specifically thinking of was the difficulty most organizations have with specialization, right? And looking, I know when we were doing the lightweight DITA talks and implementation, Tim Grantham had proposed, I think, a novel kind of approach to scripting for specialization. But I don't think Tim's working on that anymore, and I don't know if there's any more discussion to be had, but do you foresee your group taking on other projects outside of actual publishing to support some of the other technology needs for DITA in the future?
So when you say your group, I'm curious how we would define that group. Yeah, look around for the group. Where are the lines?
Yeah.
Like I more, like these days, my contributions to this represent more on the OASIS side, spec side. I don't think that group is going to create new tooling or take on new tooling. For development, Jarno's really the big star here. I don't expect the toolkit itself to be creating new tools like that unless something fascinates you. Yeah.
So it's just a matter of finding something that is interesting, then I'll probably start to work on it. The limiting factor is time. Business people might say resources or even say money. With me it's just time. I would like to do other things too in the DITA sort of field, but I just don't have enough time. And I haven't gotten ideas that were good enough to start really investing in things. I do have the best tool name ever, and I have the domain for it already. I'm not going to tell you it because there's nothing there yet, but I have the project name. It's the best one ever.
He's right, it is.
Yeah. So now I just need the idea what the tool should be like, because I can't rename Open Toolkit.
I mean, you could. That would be quite a shock to open next year's DITA-OT day. It's like, we are no longer DITA-OT.
And we had a question to the list we created earlier.
Yeah, and ask it now.
Or you can ask directly, yes.
What is the name of that tool? Because that was cool.
You were told you could ask us anything. You were not promised answers.
We can't tell it.
No.
No.
Is it Y? Because X is already.
Nope.
No.
Nope. It's longer than that, and it has something to do with the word DITA.
If we guess it, maybe say yes or no.
Get a sticker.
Are there
I
any
may
stickers left?
say
I have
that
some.
the guess was right, or I may not say it was right.
You could also spend probably a few months plugging in domain queries to figure out which domain is taken. But
Oh, damn.
Other questions?
None?
None? Shall we look at the
Yeah.
list? The first question on the list is to Roger. Again, we were not promised answers, but the question is, Why did Roger shave his beard? You really took this ask them anything literally. Would you like to pass on that question?
I figured you wouldn't recognize me if I had a beard because I've never had one here before, so
Yeah.
maybe next year if you want it.
Thank you. That would have been very embarrassing. Next question. How was Terminator, Jarno?
It's a wonderful movie, everyone should see it. Terminator 2, yes, it's an action movie too. Predator 2 is probably the best one. Predator 1 is also good.
Any follow-ups to that? No. The next one actually requires some thought. How many cats worked on the DITA-OT since its origin? So I can answer for myself. 3 total.
2 of mine.
2 more. 6 more.
3
And
plus 2 plus
I don't know
6.
from all the other contributors over time.
Yeah.
Like we've had some long-term contributors that are not here anymore, but I don't know if they were cat people.
The Australian
Yeah,
lady.
Deborah Pickett
Yeah.
was one. I don't know if she had cats. Never came up somehow. It's because we didn't have this conference.
Yep.
Okay, what was the next one? One of the questions was simply GUI.
I started a GUI, I wrote parts of it, and then I got bored with it and threw it away. Because oxygen exists.
Well, also, we had the question earlier about how many people use the command line versus some GUI. And there were not that many people using the command line. So if we built a GUI, it would be for that tiny number of people who don't already have a GUI that someone else has done better.
Mm.
So, yeah. One question is about how to contact us, and I think the answer there is use the forums.
Mhm.
So discussion forums is a big one at GitHub.
Maybe let me
Yes.
comment on that one because it comes up a lot, and I think the reason that we prefer that is because the public forums allow others to answer. It's not so much that we don't want you to contact us; we do, but there are so many other people that know the answers to these questions that aren't the 3 of us, and we're sometimes on vacation or doing other things or something like that. So, you know, I sometimes receive rather lengthy suggestions for what could be done with the documentation in the form of an email. And then what happens is I read that and say, oh, those are all very good ideas. I should probably respond to this email properly. But I don't have time to respond to this email properly right now, so it goes to the next day or something like that. And then that's one of those things that's kind of on my list of things to do, and then I have to sit down and take a half an hour to put as much time into the answer as someone obviously put into writing this email, and that's just it. No one else benefits from that. So if that happens in a public forum, if I take the time to answer that question thoughtfully in the public forum, all of you can read that 10 years later. And the same way for if you take the time to thoughtfully pose a question to us, and you do that in a public forum, there are other people that can then see your question, maybe even answer it, or something like that. So we just find it generally more useful. We've varied the ways that we communicate over the years, and for a while we were doing things in Slack, in a sort of public Slack group that everyone could join. That was back when Slack was in a phase of their investment as a startup, when their biggest goal was to get a large number of users. So there was unlimited history, and it was free. And so you could go back and see 2 years worth of messages in there. But of course, Slack has changed their business model now. So you only have 90 days of history or something like that. And that's very private only to the people that actually are on that. And then we lose 3 months. After 3 months, we lose everything. So that's why we prefer, the GitHub discussions or the DITA users list or things like this, because it's more permanent, and we can all refer back to that.
And when we have those other people responding to things, we can also pick them out and say, you should come present at DITA-OT Day next time.
Yeah.
And then we don't have to spend as much time up here.
Yep.
It benefits everybody. The next one, what is your favorite output format and why? Jarno, I assume you're going to say Java help? No.
No.
No?
I wonder. I don't use OT, so I really don't have a favorite output format. If I did, then it would probably be I still don't know. How about you?
I guess probably just the HTML output, because it's the one that we publish on the site and that's the one everyone reads. So when I convert things to other formats, it's usually just for a test. So probably that. Yep.
How about you?
I don't think I have a favorite. HTML is certainly the most used. No question, but thanks for your work. That is probably directed at you two. Good job.
Thank you.
How many cats do we have together? Well, we sort of answered that.
Well, not right now.
Not currently. I currently have 2.
3.
0.
How much of your own time do you spend working on DITA-OT? Not a lot for me these days. In the past, it's been a tremendous amount.
It varies.
Yep.
But evenings, weekends, not all the time, of course. Depends on how much energy one has. And sometimes you just don't feel like doing anything, and sometimes you feel more energized to work on a new feature, like these 2 things. And I think it's happened more or less every year after the conference. You're really tired, you got the release out, you could take a vacation, some time off OT, but then you feel energized and start to work on some other thing. But then in a way it's good, because then you spend the next month doing something new, and then you wait 11 months to release it.
I mean, for me, that number has fluctuated over the years. I worked as an independent consultant for a long time, so I was in the habit of time tracking, because that was the way that I kept track of what I needed to invoice my customers. And that doesn't work that way for DITA-OT, but I still did the numbers because it was just running in the background anyway. And for me, that number has been a couple hundred hours a year. Every year for the years that I've been on the project, there have been years when that couple hundred has been a higher number, and there have been years like this past year when it's been a little bit lower, but it's still a couple hundred hours every year. So.
I just realized that it says your personal time. I only use my personal time.
Same here.
No
Yeah.
company time.
Right. Yep.
The next one is, why do you continue to work on this in your free time after so long? Is it really that much fun? Should we just chuck it all out? No.
When I usually start something, I don't stop. So, because I started to work on OT and I haven't found a reason to stop, then I just continue. And I like you guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good answer. Just show up is one of the secrets to success, I suppose. So, if you've been doing anything for a long time, it becomes a habit. It also is, yeah, it feels like a little bit of an obligation perhaps, but it is a fun obligation, and I enjoy working with these two as well, so it's a good dynamic. That's part of it, but it's also because people tell us that it's useful, so
yeah.
That makes a big difference. If you would all say just go away and stop doing this because it's useless, then I would find other things to do with my time.
The first year that we held this conference, the Oxygen team suggested it, and we thought no one will come to this. And the first year was almost 100 people, I think, and then it was over, and said, do you want to do it again? It's like, nobody's going to come to this again. And now we've done it 9 times, and we keep getting a crowd this, like, roughly this size every time. And I think that if it had fizzled out that first year, or if the crowds didn't come and there didn't seem to be this community interest, it probably also wouldn't drive us as much.
Right.
Would be my guess.
So I told my daughter that I'd be away for a while, go to Denmark. She asked me what are you going to do there, so I told her I'm going to talk in front of people and tell them stuff. And she asked me, are you famous? so my response was no, but some people do recognize my name, and some people use the stuff I sort of do with the computer. And that's sort of a big thing, that people do use the stuff you write, because the GitHub is full of people who contribute to open source and write their own repos and tools, but they're not really used by anyone. OT has users, even though most of the users are completely invisible because you work in a company and there's no visibility to the usage. And we don't even have any idea how many users we have or how much it's used, how many times the OT is run in a day. And that's okay, we don't need to know. Just that you're making an impact, even if the impact is to be free labor for large American companies, it's still something.
Yeah, I think the notion of giving back to the community was something that for me was an important motivating factor. I mean, I had started to use the toolkit for some client projects that I was working on, where I was asked to help them improve their publication processes, and so I, began implementing publication pipelines with the toolkit for commercial clients, and realized, wait a minute, I'm actually earning money consulting on this thing that is free, and that just felt a little awkward. So I sort of thought, well, I'm struggling with this tool, and sometimes I see some things that maybe could be different. And so for me, that was another motivating factor. Was I just kind of felt like, if I'm using an open source tool, I'm not paying for it with my money. I should probably be paying for it with my time. So that was one way that I got into this racket, and I hope you see where I'm going with this. Right? You all use this in your work in some way, and if you would like to help it continue along, we can all use your help.
Yeah, we do have several questions that came in that I'll kind of summarize as one question.
Yeah.
Which all come down to that idea of bus factor that was mentioned earlier, and basically, what if one of you gets hit by a bus? What's going to happen? I mean, we've talked about that theme at a few of these conferences.
Every year.
Every year, pretty much. And so I think the answer there is go back and watch the videos from the previous conferences where we have whole sessions on that, and nothing really has changed. It's a few of us, but we continue to show up, and we would love to have contributions.
That's because we haven't been run over by
Yeah.
a bus yet.
Correct.
We look both ways when we cross the street.
Yes. But to jump ahead to a somewhat related question to what you were just talking about, I'm going to skip over a few. One of the questions was, can you tell us a bit about the history behind DITA-OT and how you all came to work on this? Roger's already shared his story.
Well, not really, not
Sort
the
of.
whole origin story.
That's enough.
As much as he wants to share has been shared. I've been working on DITA-OT literally as long as anyone. When it was a beta project in IBM out at DeveloperWorks, there was some scripting available to try to make it work as just kind of a download this zip and see what you can do. When we wanted to make it a real thing, they came to my team, which supported the SGML use in IBM at the time, and said, build the processing to support this DITA thing. So a lot of that code that was originally created at that point then became the DITA Open Toolkit. So I've been involved as a developer and then project lead type role for the whole time, really.
Just
Ever
20
since
odd
it
years
was,
now?
yeah, it's been a long time.
Mm-hmm.
I started that prototype coding 2002, 2003.
Mm-hmm.
Yeesh. That's a long time. Maybe I should hang this all up. No.
I was working for Nokia, and they adopted DITA, which wasn't DITA at the time, it was IBM DITA. And I think I or someone else with me wrote the first DITA processing inside Nokia. Open Toolkit didn't exist at the time. And then at some point, OT was released as an open source thing by IBM. We adopted it, started to use it. At some point, we replaced our own custom system with OT and started to modify it. And because I was working on it during my jobby job, and then I had issues someone was wrong on the internet.
That would have been me, probably.
Then I started to sort of bug them, the IBM guys, and sort of got hooked in just by accident.
Yeah, he submitted so many fixes and then so many features, and we had more gatekeeping at the time to like review every pull request and all these things, and it became such a chore to review all of his stuff, and it was always so good that we eventually just said, okay, you're a committer now. Which is, I mean, that's how a lot of open source works. If you are such a nuisance because you're doing so many good things, eventually you just become part of the team.
So that's how I got you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm afraid that's how I got into this as well. I was sitting at Jarno's house for private reasons, and he looked at me and said, "Aren't you a technical writer?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, you use this toolkit thing, don't you?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, I'm working on this 2.0 release. We need some release notes. Would you help me to write those?" And the key point there was, help me to write those. I said, "Yes, I will help you to write those." And so I helped him to write those, and then he looked at that and shared that with Robert, and I imagine the two of them had some sort of conversation, and then at some point, Jarno sort of handed me the keys to the car and said, "This is your job now."
That's the thing. If you're given a sort of authority, then you have some responsibilities. I just gave you the authority, the power to do things by giving you the keys, and now you have responsibilities.
Yep.
I'm so sorry for that.
Let's see. I think we've probably kind of covered that one. Are grouped values working incorrectly in DITA-OT or in Oxygen? I don't know, and I think we need to know more details. And probably if grouped values are not working for you, then open an issue and we can discuss.
I don't know what that means.
I'm guessing.
Actually, I can explain.
Yes.
You can filter by category, or you can filter by individual value, but you cannot do both. So I'm not sure if it's the DITA spec is quite vague about it.
I think, if I recall correctly, the DITA spec is the problem here.
So this guy on the right.
Yes.
Throwing me under the bus, are you?
I think it's because of the way the spec wants it to be. Not sure. I've struggled with not the spec itself, but the implementation. There's at least one bug in the filtering when you group attribute values. I'm not going to tell you what the bug is. There's no issue about it because I discovered it while working on the code. So if I don't tell you about the issue, then no one will ever hit it, of course. If I do tell you, then you start to assume that this is the way I want to do things, and it doesn't work. But I think it's because of the way the spec is written.
So maybe open a ticket, because
so
in the spec I think both should work.
Yeah,
Filter by category,
yeah, I mean,
or by individual instance.
in my opinion, it has nothing to do with the spec language. I think by design, you can't achieve that.
And I think it's impossible to say for sure without seeing the actual example of what you're trying to filter. So I think
open an issue.
Open an issue would be the best way to go there.
Yes.
So then we can have the actual sample and anyone can comment on it.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. What are the best training courses for starting to learn DITA-OT? I think this is one I would actually like to turn on the audience, much like we started the day asking, what do you want from this? One of the things I would like to know from the audience is how you would recommend getting started, or how did you get started? What would you have done differently? Because I've been with this so long, I can't even, I'm not qualified to say this is a beginner's path anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm not in a good place to answer that. So does anyone here have recommendations for how to get started? We've put everybody to sleep.
Gary
Oh, sorry,
has
Gary,
mine.
yes.
Well-
Where's the mic that was out there?
Yeah, there's a lot of, okay. There's a lot of resources on how to learn how to use DITA, but how to build a plugin, for example, I used Elliot's old site on how to do that, how to do a specialization. Yeah, there's a few resources out there, and I remember posting on the forum and got a bunch of responses from people, a compiled list of where to go for resources, and I think that's a good resource.
I know we also have folks in the audience that provide training, but
Yeah, we offer training, but we were saying we shouldn't say it because it's not in the spirit of open source. We do charge for it.
yeah. I mean,
But
yeah.
you're a sponsor, you're allowed
Yeah,
to
you
sell your
sponsors
services.
are allowed to advertise their services, yes.
So we offer we offer periodically once or twice a year. It's a virtual training, 2-hour sessions. It's actually 10 sessions, 8 base, and then there's 2 extras because
Wow.
there's a lot to learn. So the 8 is PDF and HTML5, and then we have 2 extra sessions, one on Oxygen Web Help and one on Maramo, right?
Oh, then we have 3
Oh, then we have 3 extra, sorry.
Because of CSS.
Oh, and we also have CSS to PDF, so, yeah.
Wow.
I'll also say how I learned was through the kindness of others. I learned from another consultant in the industry who was generous enough with his time to teach me. And so like the spirit of mentorship is very rich in this room, and yes, time is valuable for everyone, but I was able to learn a lot just from people giving me kind of scraps of their time, including people in the room. So
Yeah.
building relationships here is probably an essential
Yeah.
avenue.
Yep. Me too. Leaf had it.
I think one thing that's been unsaid or implied by all of the responses is that you know XSLT, and so learning XSLT is almost the first step in learning about how to use and implement DITA-OT. So start there. If you want to customize it in a deep or effective way. There's a lot that can be done, as was shown earlier, without changing anything other than some parameter values. And maybe that's all of all you need to do with it. But if you need to dig in deeper, XSLT.
I think there are increasing options available for PDF without digging into the FO. But for HTML, yeah, a few simple XSLT tweaks, if you can make them, can go a long way. All right. Let's see. How does someone who is GitHub inept contribute to the OT? Oh, sorry. Yes.
I just
Sorry.
want to add,
Yes.
There's a book, Lee White's.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, for PDF, I did recommend that as well to someone earlier. Lee White's DITA for print.
DITA for print, and the second edition, I have the first one, so the second is probably better.
Okay, how does someone who is GitHub inept contribute to the OT project?
I'm afraid the answer also contains the word GitHub. And that is filing issues helps us a lot. So just reporting the things that don't work for you, even if you don't know how to fix them, that is one of the ways that help us to understand what people need. If there are issues out there that have already been filed and you have that problem too, comment on that issue and say, me too, or whatever, so that we know that that issue is still important. Because as you saw in the last slide in my talk earlier this morning, we do have a lot of issues that have been there for a long time, but we're not sure how important they are to people. So if this is something that you're struggling with, we need to know that, because that will help us to understand what's important to work on. Yes, filing an issue or commenting on one on GitHub does require you to sign up, but it's not harder to sign up than any other service. You just need an email address and a password, and then you can say, this doesn't work for me. Even if you're not particularly comfortable with version control, don't let the word Git in the GitHub site scare you away. You can still use that forum to communicate with us, and that is the preferred format for us to discuss changes within the code, just because it's easier to reference things there directly in the discussions that happen there. So if you imagine that you are reporting something like this on the DITA users list, which you are also welcome to do, we do read that, but it's email. And the code isn't anywhere nearby. Whereas in those forum discussions there, you can just insert a link to the line of the code that's not working or something like that and say, do I understand correctly this does X? And then someone can say, yes, it does. So it's that discussion happening in context that is quite helpful to us. But if that still, because of the word Git, is intimidating, then the DITA users list is there. That is a way to report issues that you're having. It's just that we don't necessarily use the discussion that happens on GitHub users as our to-do list, whereas the GitHub issues are effectively our to-do list. And like anyone that has a private to-do list, we don't always do everything on the list, and some of the things kind of get kicked down the road a while. But that's the to-do list. So if you'd like to make sure that something is on the radar, then that's probably the place to put it, because it's more likely that we'll see it there. And the other nice thing about that is that if you know how to fix the problem, not only to report it, but how to fix it, because you realize something silly is broken on line 7 of some file, you can actually do that yourself and then send it to us, and we can say, hey, yeah, that's a good idea, that is broken, fixed. Right? So that makes it super easy. And even if you can't do that, maybe someone else that's reading that knows how to fix that. And so we see that a lot. Someone reports an issue and says, this is broken, I don't know how to fix it, and someone else says, hold my beverage. And then we have a fix, right? And that fix might not come from us. And as Jarno said this morning, a lot of the release notes for the 4.3 release contain only 2 bug fixes, because so many other things were fixed in 4.2.1, .2, .4. So, we rely on those bug fixes that come from the community. So you posting in public that something isn't working increases the likelihood that it could perhaps get fixed. If you write a private email to one of us and say, I think this is broken, it's probably not as likely to get fixed as if you were to post that in a public forum.
There's also few sessions from the. So there's also an option that there are sessions from previous DITA Open Toolkit days where explain how to become skilled in Git. So that's also one option that to learn it. And like I said, there are sessions to support you in that learning if you want to learn.
I'm afraid that also one of the first sessions that we gave at DITA-OT Day, it may have been the first one, I think, I'm not sure, was how to contribute to the DITA Open Toolkit project. So there's an entire session on that where we walk you through that, and although the tools have changed a little bit over the years since then, I think everything that was said in that presentation for the most part still applies. The year that we did that, we immediately got contributions. So I was speaking to someone this morning who immediately at that first DITA-OT Day contributed a first little fix to the documentation. So thank you once again for doing that. You're here, and that's nice, and that just makes it really easy when people do that. So we really appreciate that. So I encourage you to, if you can, help us.
Okay, I guess that's one other answer. So if it's how does someone who is GitHub inept? Well, at one point I was GitHub inept, and Jarno said, Git is the new thing. We should move this project over to GitHub. And so I bought the O'Reilly book on Git, and I read enough chapters of it to figure out, oh, that's what this is about, and then moved from there. So yeah, we all started there at some point. I'm going to jump down to this one because it's fun. Would you prefer if more DITA and OT plugins were available outside walled gardens?
Yes, in extreme.
Yep.
One of the problems with plugin development or developing OT and not breaking backwards compatibility is that we have access to only few publicly available plugins. So we can't have any automation to check that if we change this, how many of those break, because let's pretend 99.9% of the plugins are inside your company's system, and it's not publicly available. So we can't validate any of our changes, whether they break any or most plugins. That's sort of a problem. But it also says DITA. It would also be interesting to see more of the actual DITA, because of course I'm a developer, I go to GitHub, type DITA, and you only have very few examples of how people use it. CouchDB, which doesn't use DITA anymore, but the files are still there because someone forked it to learn DITA, perhaps. So not having access to those actual documents that people use is difficult. The same with, for example, the theme file, creating new, adding support for new things in the theme file. It's difficult because I don't have access to those PDFs that have been generated from DITA using PDF2 or some other technology. It doesn't have to be PDF2, it can be any of the other alternatives. I don't know what people need to customize or change, and what is something that, well, that font is okay or that color is okay, I don't need to change it. So not being able to look at how it's used doesn't help in development. If all that information was available, I don't say I would spend all my time looking at people's DITA files or plugin files, probably not. But sometimes it would be helpful to have that available. So if you want to open source your plugins, please do that tomorrow.
Yeah, maybe that's something that's worth repeating, because it's something we've talked about at length maybe in previous sessions when that was a newer thing, but for a few years now there has been a plugin registry, right? So if you have built a plugin for your company or your project or whatever, your organization, to do something that the toolkit doesn't do out of the box, there is a place now where you can share those plugins with the community. And I realize that if your business model depends on your company being the only one that knows how to do this, then that's not something you want to do. But if you have solved a problem at your company where this isn't your business model, but just you happen to have solved a problem that you think might be universally applicable or interesting to at least one other company in the world, then it might be worth sharing that, because that does make it easy. There's a search feature there that allows you to discover plugins and things like that, and it makes it quite easy to install them, try them out, uninstall them, and stuff like that. So we respect and understand that for some of you who are vendors and consultants, perhaps your business depends on your competitors not having access to your solution, and that's fine. We don't expect everyone to open source every plugin they build. It's fine to earn money doing that, but for many of you work at companies, and the plugin thing isn't anything that you earn money on, but you just figured out how to do this thing that everyone wants to do in DITA. And if you don't mind and your company allows you to do so, then sharing that with the world is a wonderful thing. I know that some companies don't allow you to do that because everything you do belongs to your company, and you're not allowed to do that without asking 10 lawyers. And if you work in a place like that, you have my sympathies. But I know that not everyone does. So.
All right. I think I can knock this one out fairly easily. One of the questions was just more table format support. And I think the answer there is, if you think something is broken with table formatting, open an issue. If you think something is missing, open an issue.
Mm-hmm.
Without specifics, it's hard to say more, but I think that's going to be the best, or that's going to be the answer regardless. One of them here is get rid of ant dependency, which I kind of think Jarno wrote.
I didn't. I thought...
You have a new friend.
Yeah.
Yes, I have a new friend, but I think I'm the only one who wants to get rid of ant, even though I think ants are the most...
Eric doesn't.
Okay. I think ants are the most interesting animal in the world, and there's plenty of ant species. So I wanted to go into biology to study ants, but there's really no money in it. So,
So you went to go.
so I decided to become a coder and start using my free time to this.
Spoken like someone who has not met the fire ants of Central Texas.
Oh, that would be wonderful.
We can bring some next time.
Yeah.
Thank you, that would be lovely. Ant is something that we just can't get rid of easily because it would break every plugin. There, I said it. We can't break people's plugins, even though we might be able to solve the same problems with an alternative or more simple technology, something a bit more modern. But Ant is just something we need to keep on using because of backwards compatibility. And it's challenging sometimes, oftentimes, but what can you do? Other than create DITA 2025, because it's not enough to just increase the major version number. We would actually need to adopt a new version number system completely in order to make it sort of clear enough that this breaks everything.
There's also a code name for a secret DITA project that I've heard about recently. Moving on. A couple of technical ones. When can we have attribute level validation and log collection? Not entirely sure what that means. But if you would like to provide more info, a GitHub issue would be a nice way to go.
Yep.
And we will probably, oh, there we go.
So this question is about when there are some attribute values which are not built, but in the validation it is mandatory to have. So is there a log system that captures that?
So is there a log system that captures missing attributes when something is required?
Yes.
I mean, if it's required by the schema, the DTD or the RNG, then the parser should report that it's invalid. But
And fail.
And fail, yeah. Like a topic ID is required. So if you're missing a topic ID, the parser will not be able to parse the file.
So recently I came across one problem where the format, attribute format was required for PDF, .pdf extension, and it was there, but it was showing error, and it was not getting captured in the log.
So I don't think they might pick that all up, but it sounds like a PDF link that was missing format equals PDF, and it didn't fail well enough, I think is probably a way to describe that.
Mm.
I think probably opening an issue and we can see what could be improved there. I think, is this the last one here? Document the DITA file set ant statement. Speaking of ant, there's a request for documentation around one of the private ant properties, or ant, what's the term? Ant elements, macros, that Jarno has created. And in response to that, we already have a GitHub issue, number 340 in the docs repo, created by Roger as soon as he saw that question.
I can speak to that.
Oh, okay.
So thank you for asking that question. We had this conversation already, but when I saw that question, it did strike me as familiar, as if someone had perhaps asked that already. My memory did serve me well. There is an issue in the documentation repository that someone named Jarno filed, and pointing out that we should perhaps do a better job of documenting that. And now that we have validation from the user community that someone would find that useful, this issue, which was filed, I believe, in 2021, so we'll take that into account, and that's just an example of the issue was filed a long time ago. It didn't get any attention. Wasn't sure how important it was to people, so it didn't get prioritized. I didn't know how to answer that question with what was in the issue alone. So we'll look at that, and perhaps you have some ideas on how we should do that.
Even though you might disagree, we really don't have that much developer documentation. The documentation does cover how to configure a trans type or how to modify the PDF styling, but in a way I still don't see that as developer documentation.
Right.
And we don't really have any documentation. If you want to start actually contributing to the OT project itself and start modifying it, we don't have documentation for that because there's only few people working on it, the code itself. And the people who have started to contribute code changes probably have been motivated enough to learn it on their own, which tells you something that they actually did that. They thought how to do it, and you probably wouldn't be able to write the developer documentation as easily as you would the end user type of documentation.
That's why that issue is still open.
Yes, because someone hasn't written it. That specific ant type, I think it's called, hasn't really been documented because in a way it's a workaround around ant's limitation and trying to make things easier at the ant layer. And if we didn't have ant, that type of solution would definitely not exist. So in a way that element is just there to let ant usage be easier. But hopefully we'll be able to document that. And I don't know where that documentation should live because
we'll find a space for it.
Most people wouldn't be interested in that. But
we do have a section in the documentation where we have some sample ANT files and some approaches for doing things there. So I think we would find a place to put that. So you're right, we don't have a lot of deep developer documentation, but you know, we'll try to draft something that will help you there. And if that's not enough, let us know.
So that takes us to the end of the questions that were submitted during Justina's presentation. Are there others that people want to bring forward now? Yes?
Yes, is it still with me?
If you can't get the mic, then we can also repeat the question.
Okay.
Oh, it's coming.
My question is, and it's actually to the whole room, is there an elevator version of what is DITA-OT that you can give to the upper management or something like that?
So the elevator pitch of what is DITA-OT?
Yeah.
is it on the front cover of our website?
Yeah, a summary on the front page of the website. I mean, there's like a paragraph version of it.
The Wikipedia page.
Yeah.
Which we need to update, by the way. The version.
Yep.
Any other suggestions from the crowd? It's hard, having worked on it so long, to on the cuff come up with that elevator pitch at this point, but Elliot can do it. Elliot can do anything.
The elevator pitch that I usually give is it's the open source framework for doing data processing to produce output where it does all the hard work.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
So it does all the hard work for your data processing.
It does all that
Yeah.
crazy pre-processing stuff that
Yeah.
data requires.
Yep.
It still requires the person to know what data is.
Right. Yeah. I
Yeah.
suppose we
Well,
could read the.
Yeah,
the
if
description.
you don't know what DITA is, then the elevator pitch will be different. So
Right.
yes. Yeah, but I would imagine if you are asking about DITA-OT, you've already at least heard the term DITA, because that should come first.
Or to paraphrase Elliot, it's a solution to a problem you may not have.
No, everybody has this.
Yeah.
ChatGPT created a pretty nice pitch.
Thank you.
I wondered if somebody in the crowd was going to use that as the cheat sheet.
At the end, it's a line. It says DITA-OT makes it happen.
DITA-OT makes it happen. There we go.
And we're done. Famous
Yep.
last words.
Did we need to talk about the future?
Mhm.
Did Rado promise people that we would talk about the future development things? I don't know.
Any other questions?
Elliot.
Elliot, yes.
Yeah, I mean, this is a serious question, but if we were to replace Ant with something else, what would you see as candidates for replacing Ant?
I don't know yet.
Hmm.
Because you need to be able to configure functionality. Instead of writing everything in Java, which would be okay for me, you'd still need to have some sort of easier configuration layer. And in a way, Ant does that now. But some of the things that Ant does don't really serve us. the way it runs the different tasks, targets. So sometimes you don't actually want to do it the way Ant does it, or how it inherits or doesn't inherit properties and parameters when you launch new Ant processes. This will turn into a talk about Ant and how it does things. Because in the end, Ant is a build tool. What we do is actually building stuff. So I don't say Ant is the worst technology that could have been chosen originally by the IBM developers. It's just that Ant assumes that everything you want to touch is a file, and everything needs to be on a disk somewhere, whereas we might want to treat or process files or resources that are only in memory, for example, or that don't have a file name. And Ant makes it hideously difficult to work on things that aren't files. So that's, I think, the biggest one. Just being able to configure the workflow, what happens after the next thing, how are the modules configured. For that, Ant works, but then again, you could just have custom XML or YAML or something like that. At one point, I was experimenting with Python. So he would write the configuration in Python and run it through JPython, but that was a long time ago. So I don't have a solution yet for that, but in a way, preprocess 2 is a step towards that, because it doesn't have all the extension points that the old preprocess had. So we're more free to change things around, and that's a limiting factor also, whether you risk breaking backwards compatibility or improve things. And oftentimes we try and not break things for people.
So I mentioned that I've been involved in DITA-OT from the beginning, and I have since it was an open source project. I was not involved during the first year or so of beta work before it was a standard, before there was the OT. And I know someone in the back row might have been involved then. He's shaking his head no, so I guess I don't have to shine a spotlight on him. But at that time, Ant and XSLT were chosen kind of with the idea that XML-based build pipeline and XML-based processing, they're all geared towards XML, was a lower barrier to entry for customization than something like Java. Right. That writers who are working with XML are more likely to be able to get in and get their hands dirty with Ant and with XSLT than with Java. And I think that's true. It doesn't mean that it's easy by any means. Like, you have to learn XSLT to get in there. It is a programming language. But it is probably slightly more familiar and intuitive to someone who's spending their day writing in XML already. But that's kind of how we ended up with where we are. But then backwards compatibility means we can't ever really get away from that. Like, once we introduce plugins and everybody's got these millions of plugins, or at least thousands of plugins around the world that are based in Ant and based in XSLT, we can't get rid of that.
So working with document-based XML, nothing comes close to XSLT. It's definitely the best language for that. So we do have a really good tool for that, XSLT. That's good that it was chosen. Also, sometimes we've been asked, why Java? Why don't you do this in C++ or something like that? Java has the best XML tools, like, by far. So even though this is a really old project, I still think that the tech stack we have works really well. It's a boring tech stack, but boring is really good. You don't want some 19-year-old coming in, changing everything, then leaving after a week, and then suddenly everything is broken. You don't want that. So boring is good, and I think that's one of the good things with Open Toolkit. It's boring and it works.
That's not as good as the tagline we had earlier.
Well, it's true.
Yes.
Yeah,
speaking towards that, would PowerShell be a good replacement for that?
I use a Mac. Robert, what do you use?
Mac.
Yeah, what was?
Mac.
Okay. Roger, what do you use?
Mac.
Yep.
PowerShell runs under every operating system.
Okay then. We would need to find some, I don't know, 24-year-old programmer who knows that language and then take over.
Yep.
I would like to say, as a fan of PowerShell, I would use Python first.
So Elliot would choose Python.
Yep.
So there are several suggestions from the crowd on what should replace Ant. I don't think any of them are stepping up to offer that service.
Yeah.
It's I mean, I hadn't really thought about that problem until now. I just curse Ant and then go on. But it's an interesting technical question.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? Did we want to touch on any future plans? Do you have any future plans? I know you have hopes and dreams, but I don't know that any of those qualify as...
OT 5.0.
Yeah,
we haven't
I don't
talked
know
about that yet.
that any of them qualify as plans yet.
Most of, or some of you, hopefully most of you were here to follow Radu's security-related talk. So nothing was new there for me. I knew all of those already. But in order to make it easier to limit what content may do, I'll probably be adding some sort of security manager type of thing that allows you to allow and block list things like file access and like URL access, just to guard against possibly malicious content, which most people never encounter, but in some cases it might be a selling point. Can I say this? Okay. Can I be really blunt about it? Okay, cut this from the YouTube video. Okay, if you show that Radu's talk to your manager, they will say, yes, we will go with Markdown solution. They'll never go with DITA because it feels like a dangerous thing. Even though Markdown tools have exactly the same type of issues, ASCII doc, and what was the restructured text. They all have the same problems, and probably DocBook too. So there's nothing new there. But if you have security manager type of features that allow you to block and allow things, it's a good idea. It makes it easier for some users to guarantee that you don't access certain parts of the disk, or you only allow access to some parts. For those lone writers who are just starting off with Open Toolkit, that would be a problem because then they'd need to configure additional things so their topics could be on a directory that is next to the map directory, which is our FAQ. So sometimes you have to toggle, do you make it easy to do things or do you make it secure or safe? And you have to find some sort of nice balance between those two. It's always better to lock things down, and then you have to have sort of user consent and understanding that you're opening these possible security holes in your system. Even though for almost all users, you'll never encounter anything dangerous. All your content is something that you wrote yourself, except when you copy-paste a AI response to one of your questions, and that contains something malicious, and then you're screwed. But that's something that we'll definitely be adding, hopefully in the next release, because we don't know if the next release will be 5.0 or 4.4.
Right.
We really haven't thought about backwards compatibility in that sense. Do we want to break something? Is there something that would warrant that type of a thing?
Yeah, we often, if we haven't planned something that we know is breaking compatibility, we often don't know until a month ahead of time what the release number is going to be. Because that's kind of what determines if it's a big major version leap or another point release.
In GitHub, our project that we're working on is always called Next. And then at some point when we know the version number, we'll just rename the project Next to 4.4 or something like that. And now when we released the 4.3, I created a new project board. It's called Next.
Other questions?
The three of us will be here, well, not here, but in the DITA Europe conference. And if someone has questions that you want to ask me directly, yes, please. If you have issues, it's probably better to file an issue in GitHub, because I won't be able to solve your problem here, even though I have my computer with me. And then, of course, every time you ask a question, if other people are able to read it, they will learn about it.
Yes, and I try to respond with mockery to as many of Elliot's questions as I can, but nobody else is included in that. So, yes, please approach and talk to us. We like to hear from people. That is why we come here, really.
Yeah. So the last talk about the use of project files, that was so wonderful to see that you came up with something and people use it. It's like the best feeling ever.
Thank you.
Yeah, as that was being shown on the screen, I think Jarno was glowing next to me, so yes.
I was giggling.
Yeah. So yeah, we like to see people using these things. We like to hear about your experiences, and yeah, it is why we keep coming back to this. So thank you all for coming.